Nintendo just announced Metroid 5, named Metroid Dread, at the 2021 E3 Direct presentation. I've always liked Metroid, but I've never been a huge fan. I decided that I really wanted to go out and replay the Metroid games since this was announced, just to, get back into it. Metroid's a really cool game series, and the first game was actually one of the first games I ever played on the Nintendo. My friend owned an NES well before I did, and along with the first two Super Mario Bros. Games, DuckTales, Duck Hunt, Mickey Mousecapade, and Cybernoid, Metroid was one of the first games I played. I always thought it was really interesting, but I could never really figure it out. Granted, I was 5 years old whenever I first played it, but when I finally did get my own NES, I rented it quite a few times. I just never found anything outside the Morph Ball. I just kind of wandered around and blew stuff up. It wasn't until a few years ago that I finally actually decided to try and beat Metroid. And it had been decades since I played it, and I was surprised at how quick it was finished. Like, it didn't take me long to get through it. But I did use a map, so I used someone else's hard work of creating a map so I could get through it faster. I still enjoyed the game, but a lot of you, if you've seen videos in the past of mine, you know that I'm not really very patient with cryptic games. Like, if I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing, I'm gonna look it up, just because that's how I have fun. I mean, I still have fun, even though it's the wrong way to play it, but it was a good game. Metroid starts with a pretty epic title screen. The word Metroid flashes on screen over a barren landscape of the world of Zebes, switching back and forth between the logo and an emergency order asking Samus Aran for help defeating the Metroids and Mother Brain. Of course, the translation here is pretty awful, and there isn't really much going on besides the two things swapping back and forth, but the theme music just makes the whole thing iconic. I love this title screen so much. After pressing start, you have the option to start and continue. Metroid uses a password system to resume your progress. It's unfortunate that we didn't get a battery save, much like The Legend of Zelda did over here. The original Japanese version of Metroid was released on the Famicom Disk System and came with a save feature. That's not a massive issue today if you're playing like I did, since if you know where you're going, the game only takes a few hours to beat. Otherwise, have fun with those passwords or save states. On the first screen of the game, Samus teleports in and an adventurous tune begins to play. The music in this game is simple, and there are only a few tracks total, but they're all really good and set the mood very well. The graphics are also pretty simple, but they do the job admirably. The environments are spooky and the enemies are full of life. The game has a lot of character. Metroid is very much an early NES game in these regards, and for some people that may be a turnoff, but it's nostalgic gold to me. I love the look and feel of this game. Well, the feel, I mean, in terms of atmosphere. As far as the controls go, they do feel pretty wonky. It's very hard to be precise with Samus, and making sure she hits the right platforms when jumping can be frustrating to start. Even after getting through to the end of the game, I was still not very good at being precise with my jumps. You feel like you're floating around in weird gravity, and it's almost as though this was done on purpose to add even more to the spooky space atmosphere. You're in an unknown world, and the gravity isn't what you'd expect it to be. And when I think of it that way, I actually kind of dig it. Though there are some areas that if you jump into by accident or by being knocked into by an enemy, you get kind of stuck. You can't get out unless you get real precise jumping out of the lava, and that's really hard to do. I got stuck between these pillars at one point, and it took forever to get back out. The other option is to just wait for the lava to very, very slowly suck the life out of Samus until she dies. Bad design, if you ask me. Metroid dumps you into Zebes without any indication of what you need to do. You'll need the manual for that. I didn't have it prior to this playthrough, but it tells you that you need to power yourself up by collecting various items before taking on two mini-bosses, Kraid and Ridley, before venturing into Mother Brain's lair. There's no map in-game, and the paltry map that Nintendo provides you with in the manual only gives you a general direction of the mini-bosses, but not the items that are supposed to help you. This is where a lot of people get turned off. Back in the day, you were expected to have a pen and paper for games like this. It was pretty common practice to draw your own maps to get through. Metroid wasn't the only game like this. The first 2 Zelda games also required this at times. The first Zelda game had maps for the first few levels, but the later levels you had to draw maps for yourself if you needed to. In Zelda 2, famously, the last dungeon really needed that drawing map skill. Cartography, yes. You had to be a cartographer to get through the last dungeon in Zelda 2. That being said, it's not something that you'd probably want to mess with today. So if you don't want to draw up your own map, you have 2 options. Quit here, play Metroid Zero Mission on GBA, which is really, really good by the way and has numerous quality of life improvements, such as a map. Or just find a map on Google Images, which is what I did. Just let someone else do the work for you. There are some people out there that would cry blasphemy at this, especially on your first playthrough, but I say screw them. Seriously, sometimes you don't want to deal with that kind of inconvenience, but you still want to see the roots of a great series. Like, I don't want to have to figure all this shit out on my own, but I do want to see where the first Various Suit and the first Screw Attack, which I forgot to get on this playthrough. Oops. Don't ever let someone tell you how to play a game. If you're having fun, that's all that matters. That's all to say, it's easy to get lost here. Without a map, there are a ton of dead ends and bad routes that you may end up dealing with if you don't use a pre-made map, and that's fine too, because sometimes danger is the spice of life. Sometimes you'll miss stuff like I did, and that's okay. I'll jump off my soapbox now. Along the way, you'll need to find missiles, which are incredibly important because not only do they help you kill enemies, they also open doors that your normal beam can't. After missiles, you can start looking for useful items like the long beam, which extends your shots to the end of the screen, the ice beam, which freezes enemies, the Various Suit, which ups your defense, the high jump, which lets you jump higher, and the screw attack. I'm so mad I forgot this, because it's essentially a jumping melee attack that kills stuff super easily. And then there's the wave beam, which is a strong beam that hurts enemies a lot more than your normal or ice beam, but you can't combine it with the ice beam, and you need the ice beam to defeat Metroids in the final area before Mother Brain, or at least that's what I was always led to believe. So after messing around with it, I swapped it back before the ending of the game. At the start of the game, you only start with 30 life, but you can pick up health refills dropped by enemies and fill yourself up to 99. You can also pick up a number of energy tanks, each with another 99 health available. So this means you can be running around with like 800 health or something like that by the end. Also, every missile upgrade you find will only increase your maximum count by 5, but beating Kraid and Ridley each give you a boost of 75 missiles, which is super helpful, obviously. When you die, you start with no health in your energy tanks and 30 life, that's it. But you retain the amount of missiles you had when you died. You have to farm energy a lot in this game, especially after a death. But if you're careful, you won't die that often. It's not a super hard game really, as long as you pick up those energy tanks. One thing I found helpful in beating enemies was to freeze them, then swap over to a missile to kill them. That made getting knocked around and taking damage less likely than if I had just stuck to my main weapons. The wave beam did help blow stuff up faster without the use of missiles, but I think I liked the ice beam missile combo more myself. Also, farming Metroids at the end of the game in Turian is a quick way to refill all of your health and missiles as long as you have the ice beam. Zebes is split up into 4 areas. Brinstar, the rocky area where you start and where Kraid's lair is hidden. Kraid's lair, which has some really spooky and awesome music. I love this track and it's probably my favorite in the entire game. Norfair, the fiery area where Ridley's lair is hidden. Ridley's lair, which is just as fiery as Norfair and a good deal tougher. And Turian, the final stretch where Mother Brain resides. The difficulty of the game ramps up in the areas that aren't Brinstar, and collecting those power-ups and energy tanks really helps make these a lot easier to manage. The bosses, Kraid, Ridley, and Mother Brain, are all pretty simple in terms of patterns, but they can be pretty tough if you don't go in prepared. The nice thing is, all 3 have some method of farming for health and missiles before the final confrontation. Kraid and Ridley have endlessly respawning enemies, and like I said earlier, the Metroids in Turian drop a ton of loot, so even going in after a death, you'll almost be fully stocked by the time you reach Mother Brain. One cool feature is that the game has several endings depending on how quickly you beat the game. Well, I mean, you just get to see Samus in various states of undress depending on how fast you beat it, which is kinda weird honestly. After the ending, the game starts over and you have the power-ups you collected during the game minus the missile upgrades and your alternate weapons. And if you beat the game and receive one of the better endings, your replay features Samus without her power armor. That's kinda neat. Overall, Metroid is a really fun game, but it's also pretty dated. I can totally understand why someone would want to skip this and play the remake on GBA instead. And that is a really good game by itself. Metroid Zero Mission kicks ass. Story-wise, that would probably be the way to go. If you're more interested in the story of Metroid, play, the GBA version, Metroid Zero Mission. But if you want to see the roots of the series, play the original. And it's neat to see where a video game series came from. And if you're a mark for an NES game, you might just enjoy this anyway. I sure did. I really like Metroid, even if it isn't the most polished, most future-proof game out there. The atmosphere alone is really cool, and it's fun to see how games could just be creepy and scary on an 8-bit system. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Later.